So I want to start by saying that this is my first time being on this end of the conversation. I'm usually sitting in your seats thinking that the person in front of me has it all together, while I'm sitting there struggling and thinking all I have to do is just sit and listen to this person's advice in order for me to get my life under control. And I'm sorry to tell you that I, like every other adult you know, am still a work in progress. So I apologize for my errors that I may make, just bear with me. So mental health is something that I've struggled with since before I walked these halls as a student more than 10 years ago. Grade 9 was a very tough year for me. I started at Forest Hill Collegiate, and within a month I was bullied and threatened to the point that I decided to make the switch to chat, where many of my friends from Leobec had come to. Fortunately for me, the C wing was being built and classes were delayed by a month, so I was only behind by a few days. The course load was double what it was at FHCI, and the pressure to get good grades weighed very heavily on me. Stress was not something I handled well, and by the time I got back from Hanukkah break, I had started to develop a very serious eating disorder to cope. For me, food was something I could control when everything else felt like it was happening to me. As my eating disorder took over my life, I became an increasingly angry person. At the time, it probably seemed to outsiders like a combination of hormones and the fact that I was in an unhealthy relationship, coupled with my new reality of living my life without my biological father, as I had recently ostracized him because of his own mental health struggles. In reality, I was starting to show signs of something called borderline personality disorder, or BPD. As I grew to hate the person I was, I lost control of myself. When I was 16, I had my first suicide attempt. It was a desperate cry for help. I was struggling in all my classes, hardly eating anything at all, and I was angry at everyone around me all the time. Following my attempt in grades 11, 12, and 13, I saw a counselor who helped for a bit. I traded one bad boyfriend for another, different kind of bad boyfriend, and went on with life. Looking back at my years of chat, I had a love-hate relationship with everything in my life at that time. I was grateful to be at a school I chose where I didn't feel completely out of place, but I was at such odds with myself that it was hard to enjoy anything. I was, and still am, an incredibly bright person, but my potential was wasted because I chose to beat up on myself, which couldn't allow me to show any of my strengths. As I walked the crowded hallways from class to class to class, I felt completely isolated and misunderstood by everyone around me. People seemed so normal, and I never felt that I was one of them. Although I was getting help, none of the issues were solved. I talked about the week-to-week problems, but the big picture issues remained untouched. And as soon as I left for university in Waterloo, I fell right back into old habits. I had never lived on my own, and the negative voices that told me that I wasn't good enough eventually took over my life. Naturally, I failed my classes in first year because instead of going to class, I was seeing how long I could go without food. My evenings were a blur because I was drinking at night and partying on an empty stomach. I moved home the following year and shortly thereafter into my own apartment here in Toronto. I decided to get a college education in marketing, and my eating had never been worse. It was the first time I was getting straight A's in my life, and I felt like I was burning the candle at both ends. My temper was worsening, and the new therapist I was seeing at the time had misdiagnosed me with bipolar, something that my biological father struggles with. I was trying to find the right antidepressants, which can be a grueling process, and when I completed my 2-year course and got my first job, I was just over 100 pounds. The job was stressful and didn't last long. 500 people were let go shortly before Christmas, and all I could think about was what a failure I was becoming. Being financially responsible wasn't something I was ever good at, and when I got my second grown-up job, the pressure of it led to my eating disorder taking a new turn. After 9 months in the workforce, my third serious relationship was over. I was 94 pounds, purging up to 10 times a day, and screaming for help. Feeling lost and helpless, I told my parents what was going on and begged them to help me. Being the supportive and loving parents they are, they called every person they could think of to get me the help I desperately needed. But when things didn't move as fast as I needed them to get me into treatment, I lost all hope and had my second suicide attempt. After a few days locked up in the psych ward and what felt like the longest month of my life passed, I went into the day hospital for eating disorder at Toronto General Hospital. During the 8-week intensive, 16-week less intensive, and 30-week-long, once-a-week check-in process, I was seeing 3 therapists in a second program at CAMH, which is the Center for Mental Health and Addictions. I was focused 24/7 solely on getting stable. I had quit my job and stopped my life in order to get well. The heavy focus on my life was The heavy focus on my life was as difficult for me as you could imagine. I felt misunderstood and lost, and I was at odds with my parents and four brothers like I had never been before. Struggling to find any kind of solution, I decided that family counseling was what we needed and found a mentor and friend in the spiritual psychotherapist, who's here today, that helped my parents and I through the tough times we were going through. Through her guidance, I was able to learn about self-love, and today, 5 years later, I have never been in a better place. While I was learning self-love, my friends all moved forward with their lives. They graduated, they got married, they did all the things you're supposed to do, and I spent most of my days learning how to love myself. I still struggle with the idea of not being on the same path as my peers. Over time, I have learned that even though I don't have the life that most of my friends chose, I know that I'm further on my self-love journey than most. I have learned that when you tap into your spirituality of your soul and the universe around you, beauty will show itself to you, and it becomes a lot harder to give up on yourself. Today, I take my medication as recommended every day to ensure that my stability isn't tampered with. My temper has all but disappeared, and coping with stress is something I handle with grace and patience instead of fear and anger. I know that I have control over my reactions and that the happiness is a choice that I get to make every day. I have learned to try to see the good in everyone and everything. I still struggle with food and my body image. I even struggle with self-harm thoughts from time to time. But I value myself and I know my worth, and I'm not afraid to make healthy choices that feel right for me, no matter what popular opinion might be. One of the biggest shifts I have noticed in myself is that I've learned to express my emotions as they come, as opposed to shoving them down and letting them explode later. Although I still have bad days, I have learned how to pull myself out of a downward spiral before it becomes a full-blown depression. I no longer consider ending my life, and that in itself is a big win for me. My best advice for anyone struggling is to trust that everything always is exactly as it should be, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You will be surprised by the amount of support that is out there waiting for you if you just ask for it. No matter how dark things seem, I have learned that there are people around you with flashlights who will help you guide you on your way until you find your own light switch.